Hello, everybody. Um, this is part 2 of Playing the Victim, Historical Revisionism in Japan by Knowing Better. I'll have their channel link in the description. So, I actually recorded this earlier, part 1, as you can see right here, right? Unfortunately, the software for screen recording decided to be not so smart and crash. So instead of reshooting or editing the two things together, I decided to make it a 2-part series, and that's for 2 reasons. For 2 parts. The first reason is, look how long this video is, 24 minutes, and I usually react for a good amount of time, so that's gonna put this video for at least 30 minutes, and that's gonna be crazy. That's gonna take a long time to upload and all that. I don't want that. And secondly, I'm too lazy to buy editing software on the laptop I'm on. I have it on my phone, I have it on my desktop, but not on this laptop, which I do recording on, which is ironic. So, I think earlier he was talking about rapes, and I don't know where we last left off. He was talking about how the best ways Japan could kill people and rape them. Oh yeah, incest. Yeah, that's what we left off. Oh my gosh, I'm so glad I'm not monetized, or else I would not be able to say any of this stuff. So, let's start.
I never heard about this.
Let's go back a little bit and raise the volume.
So we're done talking about this. You might be thinking, how have I never heard about this? This must have been carried out in secret or something. No, this was front page news at the time. There were a number of foreigners in the city, including reporters, businessmen, and ambassadors. This was the capital of China, after all. These foreigners established the Nanking Safety Zone, a 2.5 square mile area reserved for civilians that was supposed to be safe from the Japanese military. Many former Chinese soldiers hid in the zone and were subsequently captured, so the military justified regularly raiding the zone. It eventually sheltered 250,000 refugees and was maintained by just 24 foreign nationals led by John Robb, the official Nazi Party representative to Nanking. Nazi Germany was allied with Japan. He had every reason to portray Japan in a positive light, but he didn't. His letters and journals from the time tell the gruesome story of how thousands of women were raped and thousands more were murdered. He would walk the streets at night and stop rapes in progress, like a Nazi Batman, but his only superpower was his swastika armband.
Well, how do you stop it? Just because he's a foreign national from an important country? Is that why he's able to stop them? He's an important person? How does that work? Hey, stop raping that woman. Oh, okay, sorry. Go on your merry way, lady. Sorry for, putting my penis inside of you.
The idea of a good guy Nazi is just so weird that you couldn't make this up if you tried. Upon his return to Germany, the Gestapo ordered him to never speak of Nanking again. He's celebrated as the Oscar Schindler of Nanking, and there are multiple memorials to him in the city today. This lasted for 6 weeks. Reporters were barred entry to the city, and it didn't take long for foreign governments to figure out why. Then the stories started coming out. There are very few media depictions of this incident, but this one, called Flowers of War, came out in 2011 and starred Christian Bale. They definitely put some coin into this one, so it's worth giving a watch. Had I not read about this event prior to seeing the movie, I would have thought this was an exaggeration. They even go through the effort to recreate several of the iconic photographs of the massacre, including this one, which we saw earlier. Towards his credit, he does mention the rape of Nanking in his History of the Entire World, I guess.
Japan is finally conquering the East, and they're so excited they raped Nanking way too hard. They should probably just deny him.
We'll get to the denial in a bit, but this event, along with the accidental sinking of the USS Panay...
I find that weird, how there's not very many countries that take responsibility for their atrocities, or for obvious reasons. But look at Communist China, for example. Mao, who is the first leader of Communist China, during his Great Leap Forward, it caused a famine that killed like from 26 to 45 million people, and in total, I think like throughout the time he was in power, he killed around 45 million to 100 million people, and think about that gap, like the humongous gap. Jordan Peterson talks a lot about this. There's just this, like how, like 45 million to 100 million. That's such a big gap. That's like that's a 55 million people gap that you don't know about. But and then of course the Soviet Union, they also killed like tens of millions of people. I think 10 billion to 45 million, if I'm not mistaken. Um, and Mao, he's literally on the Chinese currency. Like, what if Adolf Hitler ended up killing 100 million people and he was on the German currency? Obviously, there isn't a German currency; it's the euro, but you know what I mean. But yeah, it seems like Germany and like maybe a couple of others are the only ones that actually want to take responsibility. And Turkey right now, the Armenian genocide. It's like they flip flop from between they deserved it for what they did in the past, and then they flip flop to no, we didn't do that. But yeah, just all these different countries just are denying these massacres. Why?
In Nanking during the evacuation turned U.S. opinion against Japan. But the final straw was when Japan invaded Indochina in 1940. The United States decided to cease all shipments of oil as well as other goods to Japan and ban them from using the Panama Canal. Japan's response to this was...
But then Japan spits on them in Hawaii and challenges them to war, and they say yes.
An event he leaves out of his history of the entire world, despite how important it is, and despite the fact that it wasn't just Pearl Harbor. They attacked dozens of islands in the Pacific all on the same day in order to secure their own sources of oil. I made a video about this. Pearl Harbor was just where the U.S. Pacific Fleet was based, so it's the one that got the most attention. The attack was designed to stall U.S. response long enough for Japan to fortify its other positions, which worked actually. For a little while.
Yeah,
again, I don't want to get into the specific battles of the war, but I do want to talk about the prisoners of war. As I said before, the Japanese rarely, if ever, surrendered, but for Western militaries, surrender was a perfectly acceptable option. At the beginning of this video, if you were able to name any movies about Japan in World War II, one of them was probably the 1957 movie Bridge on the River Kwai, starring Obi-Wan Kenobi. And maybe you knew about the 2014 movie Unbroken. Both of these movies are about the hells on earth that were Japanese POW camps. Of American POWs in Nazi Germany, 1 out of every 25 died in a camp. Of American POWs in Japan, 1 in 3. They surrendered. In the eyes of Japan, they were dishonorable.
What? 1 out of 25 to 1 out of... I'm struggling to even process that. Like, the Nazi concentration camps get so much of a worse reputation. Yeah, it seems like the death rate is way higher than the Japanese camps. Seriously, I'm curious to see how many, like, actually died in total. Like, just the raw number of how many people died in Japanese camps. Because obviously in Germany, like, around 6 million died.
Terrible cowards, and they
are enemies of Japan. You will be treated accordingly.
The infamous Bataan Death March in 1942 was the forced relocation of between 60 and 80,000 American and Filipino POWs over 70 miles. It's also referred to as the POW Trail of Tears, which is an apt comparison because just as many people died. In an act of perpetual defiance, the march is repeated annually at White Sands Missile Range in New Mexico. So let's skip ahead and end the war.
Bonus round, Pacific Showdown, United States versus Japan. Fight.
Oh gosh.
Finish him.
I don't want to get into whether or not it was right to use use the bombs. But I will say that destroying cities wasn't all that new. We'd been firebombing cities for a while at that point.
Yeah, the only other alternative from nuclear bombing them was to literally firebomb all of Japan, which would have been way worse. And on top of that, naval invade them. Like, that's way worse than nuking them. The death rate would have been way higher, and there would have been way more collateral damage.
This was Tokyo. Again, I made a video about this. So if I were to tell you that this was done by a single bomb, you'd think I was lying. And rightfully so, because that one's actually Tokyo. The first one was Hiroshima. The point is that you couldn't tell the difference. So when we told Japan, we are in possession of the most destructive explosive ever devised by man, their response was, yeah, sure you are, buddy. Because we had been leveling cities for some time. So we dropped a second one to force an unconditional surrender without having to invade mainland Japan.
The United States installed a new government, inspired by the United States government.
Whoa, wait. And they did some rapes? Rapes did occur in occupied Japan. But to use the same whoops, and they did some rapes tone to suggest that it was anywhere near the same scale as Nanking is just intellectually dishonest. It was measured in the hundreds, not the tens of thousands. This, along with playing up the horrors of the atomic bombs, helps paint a sympathetic picture of Japan as a victim of the war rather than an aggressor, along with a few other subtle narrative changes, like that the war was to free Asia from Western imperialism and not world domination, and Pearl Harbor was just a reaction to being backed into a corner and not an aggressive land grab. Those really are the versions of history being taught in Japan today. And that's only recently. For decades after the war, Japanese schools didn't even teach that Japan and the US were at war, or who won. But there's something else I want to say about that segment.
The United States installed a new government, inspired by the United States government.
No, we didn't. Firstly, it was much more inspired by the constitutional monarchy that Great Britain has. And secondly, there's very little new about it. All of the positions are the same. The emperor is still the emperor. The parliament still exists. Even the current day prime minister is the 63rd prime minister. We've only had 4...
Oh, yeah. I actually had a question. About, the emperor of Japan, Hirohito. Why was he not executed or anything, like the Nazis were in Germany from the Nuremberg trials? Why did that not happen to Hirohito? Like, he was leader of Japan, and Japan did all this terrible stuff. Like, why was he fine?
45 presidents. The position goes
Oh yeah, and of course he was still allowed to reign afterwards. Why?
all the way back to the Meiji Restoration. And while all of the positions stayed the same, so did many of the faces. The 56th Prime Minister of Japan was previously being held as a Class A war criminal. To put that into perspective, there's nothing higher than Class A. If Hitler was captured alive, he would have been a Class A war criminal. This is why Nazis are always the bad guys in our World War II media and not Japan. Nazis don't exist anymore. Or at least they're not in charge of anything anymore. There's a clear disconnect between Nazi Germany and present-day Germany. But if you make Imperial Japan the bad guys, you are by extension making current-day Japan the bad guys. Everything about the government and most of the people in it were the same.
It's probably how it was with Mao in China and Russia, because obviously with Russia, they went through a lot of changes. Their democracy now, all that, they're not communist anymore. But you know, there's still like this nostalgia for the USSR. You know, their anthem is pretty much the exact same. And with China, communist China, they're pretty much the exact same state as they were before, except a little bit more capitalist and more rich. So, I understand what he means.
Many Class B and C war criminals, including lower-level officers and soldiers, were tried by the Nanking War Crimes Tribunal, and many of the foreign nationals who administered the Nanking Safety Zone testified against them. The 2 lieutenants who participated in that 100 beheadings contest were tried there as well, and their defense was, and I wish I was joking here, it was only like 70 people. Weird.
What? There's only 70 people, it's fine. What?
Apparently that didn't work and they were found guilty and executed.
It didn't work. Why? It was only 70 people. Come on, guys.
One of the lower-level generals was also tried, but blamed the massacre on Koreans, which also didn't work and he was executed.
Koreans?
But most of the Class A war criminals were tried in Tokyo by the International Military Tribunal for the Far East, or just IMTFE for short. While the IMTFE found that the Nanking massacre was secretly ordered or willfully committed, they weren't allowed to prosecute the top commander, who, if you remember, was Prince Asaka, because the entire imperial family was given immunity by Douglas MacArthur. This infuriated the Chinese, but at least they could go after the other high-level officials, until 1949 when Mao seized control of mainland China and the bamboo curtain fell on Asia. Is that racist?
It's called the bamboo curtain?
Feels racist. Then the Korean War happened and the West needed a non-communist ally in Asia, so the IMTFE just sort of stopped. This was when the future prime minister was let off the hook and was allowed to continue being a politician, as long as he was pro-American. While present-day Germany paid war reparations, Japan never really had to. And since the chief culprits of the rape of Nanking never stood trial, Sino-Japanese relations were sour for decades. Eventually, the governments of both Communist China and the Republic of China forgave Japan in order to open up.
Wait, what does that piece of text say? Republic of China now resides on the island of Taiwan. Okay.
Communist China and the Republic of China forgave Japan in order to open up trade relations, which infuriated Chinese citizens. Japan has never formally apologized for any of its war crimes. The United States helped with that cover-up narrative. How do you convince millions of citizens that the people that they just fought a few years ago were now our friends? Mostly by repeatedly apologizing for and playing up the horrors of the atomic bomb. Because, you know, two wrongs make a right. They cancel each other out.
If you look at history, recently, we have bombed the masculinity out of an entire continent. We dropped 2 atomic bombs on Japan, and they've been drawing Hello Kitty and ever since.
As funny as that is, he's also not wrong. Hello Kitty, Karobi, and more recently, Gudetama.
Oh yeah, and anime, the atomic bombs were justified. I forgot to have this last point earlier whenever I said that they were justified. If we didn't have the atomic bombs, we wouldn't have anime. Like, come on, guys.
Were all created by Sanrio to play into the victimization and pacification of Japan. They are all designed to look vulnerable. All of these characters are just so cute and defenseless, and you just want to hug and protect them. Oh my... It's also known as kawaii culture, and it really grew during the 70s and 80s, but continues today. Then the Cold War ended, and the stories came out. Japanese soldiers who no longer feared prosecution talked openly about what they did. Books were published, like Iris...
Yeah, I just raped, those people from Nanking. Yeah.
Things the rape of Nanking, and movies were made like Flowers of War and Unbroken. And still Japan, at least officially anyway, denies their role in the tragedy, saying it was all just Soviet and Chinese propaganda, which is...
What?
Kind of true, by the way, even some blaming the United States for it, which... Or saying it was only 3,000 people who were killed, even though there are single mass graves with more bodies than that, or that it was Chinese looters, or all the women who were raped were actually paid prostitutes or comfort women, which is the same reason Korean-Japanese relations are still on the rocks. The Japanese government thinks that apologizing for the sins of the past would be an insult to veterans. Those responsible have already been prosecuted. How many times must they apologize? Once would be nice, you know. For starters, having any sort of academic or political discussion on Japanese war crimes in Japan usually results in career suicide, and more often than not, death threats. Whenever a Japanese politician makes the mistake of apologizing in a personal capacity, not an official one, they either retract it shortly afterwards or are voted out. The current Prime Minister of Japan, Shinzo Abe, made that mistake in 2006, and now repeatedly claims that comfort women weren't forced into sexual slavery but were private entrepreneurs. On a visit to the Yakusuni Shrine, which memorializes over 1,000 convicted war criminals, 14 of which are Class A, he said, "The men convicted by the Allied tribunals are not war criminals under the laws of Japan. Japanese denial of their war crimes, and especially Nanking..."
Under the laws of Japan, there's international laws about war crimes. Like, come on, just because it doesn't violate your country's, code of conduct doesn't mean it doesn't violate, you know, the international community's rules.
Nanking is akin to denying that the Holocaust happened. The most successful...
Wait, what?
Especially Nanking, is akin to denying that the Holocaust happened.
I don't know what that word means that he said earlier. Kin.
The most successful historical revisions are those that only tell one side. But in recent years, we've started to hear the other sides of this story, and it's important to listen. The saying goes, those who do not learn from their history are doomed to repeat it. You no longer have the luxury of saying you didn't learn, because now you know better. I promised I'd make this video...
Wrong. That video was a lot better than I was expecting, to be honest. Well, I hope you all enjoyed that video. I certainly did. Oh boy, that's a lot of dislikes. I wonder why. But seriously though, on a side note, if someone made a video about the Holocaust, there wouldn't be this dislike ratio. There would be way more likes than dislikes. We're talking about Japan. Oh no, they didn't do anything wrong. Let's dislike this video. Anyways, it was a great video. We all enjoyed. By the way, I want to make it clear that these videos do not reflect, like, me, even if I've watched them. Like, for example, because sometimes I accidentally show these things. Sometimes I accidentally end up showing my videos, my recommended videos. And I have my own political opinions, but I watch stuff from both sides, right? So if you see videos of my recommended that happen to be political videos, don't think I'm on that side and then get all angry with me or something. Okay? So, that's a great video. I already said that, but make sure to check out the channel in the description, or the original video if you want to share it to your friends, whatever. Share this video to your friends, actually. Let me know what other videos you want me to react to. Yeah, that video, wow. I had no idea about all like, the scale of Japanese crimes. Like, I know they did a lot of bad stuff. I didn't know it was this bad. But yeah, thank you for watching. Goodbye. Subscribe, yeah.